The greatest lie humanity tells itself is that we have outgrown human sacrifice. We call it by different names now and make our offering to different gods. We offer young men we call soldiers, as if the designation means that their mothers cry less when they die. We call masses of humanity collateral damage and turn our eyes away from the pictures of their lifeless bodies as we sip our morning coffee. And the truth is, we don't do it because we are heartless. We do it because we believe that it is necessary for the world to keep running. We do it because we believe that the gods whose favor we so desperately seek, freedom, security, prosperity, flourishing, that they demand blood as the price of their favor. We do it because we cannot see any other choice. And maybe that's why we read the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, on Rosh Hashanah. Because the story of the Akedah isn't about inconceivable obedience. When Abraham prepares to sacrifice Isaac, he is just accepting the same bargain of blood we still accept today, that some need to die for the world to flourish.
Today, let's look at two words very carefully: massacre versus holocaust. Let's first look at the definition of the word massacre. The definition of a massacre is an indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of people. I think we can all agree with that. It's very clear, right? I said throughout history, massive, brutal slaughters have almost always been defined as massacres. Here's a list of massacres that involved Black Americans. And then I proceed to list them: the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the Tulsa Race Riots, the Okasee Massacre, the Elaine Massacre, the Memphis Massacre of 1866, the New Orleans Massacre of 1866, Carroll County Courthouse Massacre, and then there's been many others. But you see, there's a pattern here, all right? History and historians rightfully and accurately describe these events as a brutal slaughter of a people. Okay, I think we can all agree with that. There's no argument with that, right? People tend to call these things massacres. Like you have the Boston Massacre, for example, right? People tend to call those things, right? Now, let's take a look at the word Holocaust. The word has a much older history to it, but here is the definition and origin. The term Holocaust, from the Greek holocauston, meaning a completely burnt offering to a god. I'm going to take time, and I'll take all the time you need to process what I just said. The term Holocaust, from the Greek holocauston, meaning a completely burnt offering to a god, was used long before World War II, originally referring to a sacrifice consumed by fire in ancient Greek and biblical contexts. And then I said, now this is interesting, isn't it? The Holocaust has been drilled in our heads through movies, documentaries, shows, lectures, state laws, lessons in schools, etc., as an indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of people, has it not? Black Americans have never, now I'm speaking of Black Americans here, but other groups that, like Native Americans and all that, they've had their massacres too. But I'm speaking as a Black American for Black Americans. Black Americans have never described our massacres as sacrifices to a god. However, it has been Jews who have forcefully described their massacre as a sacrifice to a god. Here's a bit more history. However, its modern use, referring to mass murder of Jews and other groups by Nazi Germany, emerged gradually after the war. So they weren't saying Holocaust during the war. This didn't come up until the 1940s, way after the war had ended. All right. In the 1940s and 50s, English language writers began using Holocaust with the lowercase h to describe the destruction caused by the Nazis. The term was popularized in the 1950s and 60s by Jewish writers, journalists, and historians to describe the genocide of 6 million Jews. It became widely capitalized, the Holocaust, after the release of the 1978 American TV miniseries Holocaust, starring Meryl Streep, which brought the term into mainstream global use. And then I said the word massacre would have been much more appropriate, since this is how it's been taught to us. It was taught to us that this was a great massacre. But they specifically and intentionally called it a Holocaust, a sacrifice to a god. So the question before you is this: what God demanded human sacrifices? And then I'm just leaving it at that. Literally leaving it at that. So for the YouTube overseers, if you want to suggest, if you think that I'm denying the nope, not denying anything. I'm just reading the words that you gave to us. And once someone takes the time and actually look at the words that you have put on us and how careful we have to talk about these things, we're being very careful in talking about it. We're looking at the words themselves. And everybody else in the world will refer to those events as a massacre. But why is it that you refer to that event as a sacrifice to a god? What God are you talking about? What God in that year referred to, and you're talking in the 20th century, what God demanded the sacrifice, a burnt sacrifice of human beings? What God are we referring to? I would like to know the answer to that. And let's not play semantics here with, well, that was the closest word. No, there's a lot of other words that you could have chosen. Massacre being one. And then later on, the part I didn't include here is that in later years, they started changing it from Holocaust to Shoah. Shoah. All right? Shoah. Look it up. Shoah. Shoah basically it's a Hebrew word that actually more refers to, it has a much closer definition to massacre than Holocaust. So this wasn't just a quick grab and, I can't think right now, let's just call it a Holocaust. No. Bernays, who was the founder or the father of marketing, he was also a Jewish person. He would have known this, what I'm telling you. So he's not going to, so everything was very intentional on why they called things the way they called them. So what God is it? Something to think about, isn't it? Because no black person has ever called our massacres anything else but that. They're massacres. I've never looked at any of these massive killings of black people throughout history as a sacrifice to a god. What God are you talking about? This is why we got to read, y'all. We got to read. We got to ask questions. We got to do these things. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to play this clip again because you guys really need to make sure you're listening to every word that she just said in that clip. So let me roll the clip again. Please pay attention.
The greatest lie humanity tells itself is that we have outgrown human sacrifice. We call it by different names now and make our offering to different gods. We offer young men we call soldiers, as if the designation means that their mothers cry less when they die. We call masses of humanity collateral damage and turn our eyes away from the pictures of their lifeless bodies as we sip our morning coffee. And the truth is, we don't do it because we are heartless. We do it because we believe that it is necessary for the world to keep running. We do it because we believe that the gods whose favor we so desperately seek, freedom, security, prosperity, flourishing, that they demand blood as the price of their favor. We do it because we cannot see any other choice. And maybe that's why we read the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, on Rosh Hashanah. Because the story of the Akedah isn't about inconceivable obedience. When Abraham prepares to sacrifice Isaac, he is just accepting the same bargain of blood we still accept today, that some need to die for the world to flourish.
This is really interesting, and I want to make sure you get it. Now, you heard my point earlier when I was talking about the difference between Holocaust and massacre. But I now want to just address something else here. What is being implied here is that people, you and I, we will not be able to experience any level of peace unless there is human sacrifice involved. Now let's pause here for a second. Remember, I told you we're going to slow down and we're going to absorb what's being said here. Is that you or I or anybody, we will not be able to experience any level of peace unless there is a blood human sacrifice involved. Now, she mentioned wars and all of that, and she even went back to Abraham and Isaac and all of that. But even that story, we've talked about that on our platform as well. What God are we referring to that requires or demands a human blood sacrifice in order for you to get a peace or to get a blessing or whatever, that somebody has to die? Now, I want you to think about this really hard because, for example, I am sitting in a very peaceful environment right now. Okay? There are people who have been in peaceful environments for literally thousands of years. The only thing that changes that is when people begin to start bringing in war. And just about every war is pretty much unnecessary. I mean, when it gets down to it, we don't need to go to war with anybody. We really don't. That's only when greed starts coming in, and when things like that begin to happen, then of course it escalates into war. But no, as long as everybody has their own place and they're happy with their own place, there is no need to go to any kind of war. There is no need for that. And so every day, you and I, we have an opportunity to find a place of peace in our own lives. We don't need a human sacrifice in order to achieve some kind of peace. Do you understand that even before Christianity, there were civilizations that actually existed thousands and thousands of years prior to that, and these civilizations were living in peaceful times? But what Christianity teaches us is that we are not able to experience that unless we accept the blood human sacrifice of one person. So every Saturday or Sunday, whenever people, get together for their time of worship or whatever, they are dedicating those times to this human blood sacrifice, a human sacrifice. Now, the reason why, again, I want to really emphasize this is because of the fact this is the same kind of stuff that the West would mock and mimic people that live in African countries or people with darker skin. They would oftentimes mimic these other religions for practicing human sacrifices. But yet these same people want you to acknowledge and accept their human sacrifice. Now, I'm not an advocate of either one, quite honestly, but isn't that ironic? While they condemn human sacrifices that take place in some, extreme religions in other lands, they want to replace that with their blood human sacrifice. I want you to really think about this. So absolutely not, under no conditions whatsoever, you do not require the blood of a human sacrifice in order to achieve peace or to find peace in your own life. That is the most ridiculous thing, and it is something that we have been programmed to accept and to believe that this is a requirement in order to find peace in our own lives. You do not need the blood of a human sacrifice to find peace in your life. That is the most deranged, evil, and wicked thing ever that we have come to accept in this matrix system. Look around. You have birds, you have plants, you have a sky, you have nature. Nature is the personification of peace. Birds don't wake up in the morning and say that they need a blood sacrifice in order to be peaceful. These trees don't need the blood sacrifice of a human being in order to grow in their silence and be peaceful. Nothing in nature requires a blood sacrifice. This comes from very wicked and demonic people. So if you are in a belief system that centers around a human blood sacrifice, my challenge to you is start using your head, start asking questions. It doesn't add up.